I'd like to call the meeting to order, please. We are so glad to have a good turnout today. We have a great program, and we have a number of new members here. I'd like to start with a salute to the flag, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Today we have some sad news. Doug Moore, a valued member of Men's Club and a whole lot of other things in this community, died recently. And I'm going to ask, before we have a moment of silence, I'm going to ask Brad Sweet to come up and make a few comments about Doug. Is Brad was here? I saw him.
Oh, he's here.
Oh, there he is. Okay, Brad, please come up. And we've got the mic today because some people, one or two of us, have a little trouble hearing, so the mic should help.
Anyway, Doug Moore, a very special friend to me, and a guy that I had came to love, I guess is the better way to put it. And as you all know, Doug has been a member of this club. It was Doug who, amongst other people, was instrumental in getting me to become a member of the club because he thought a great deal of this organization. In fact, probably the first thing that got me involved in the group was when he said, "Come with me, I got a job for you at 7 o'clock on some day so that you can participate in working on a spaghetti dinner." And that was my introduction. Russell and a few other guys I was introduced to at the same time. So Doug was very, very special. Shortly after I joined him for that activity, I all of a sudden said, what's next for me? And he said, well, I have been participating for now, I think he said it was about 60 years in barbershopping. And he said, you've got to join me at the Surf Tones. He says, I think you've got a voice that would be appropriate for barbershopping. And so I said, that's interesting. I put him off. He stuck Dean Turner in. He brought Dean in. And so a combination of Doug brought us into Surf Tone barbershop singing. I said, before I commit to that, Doug, I want to do a little quid pro quo here. You like to sing, I like to sing, so how about we do this? I'll go to barbershopping if you come to Mashpee Congregational Church and join our choir, which was just organizing at that point in time. He did that, and he continued to do it. Sometimes I trailed away from the Surf Tones. Doug never trailed away. He was always there as a tenor in our choir. So he was a pretty special guy, and as many of you may know, he was a tugboat captain. He was known as the captain probably as often as he was known as Doug, and never known as Harris. That was his birth name. And don't ever go looking for Harris because he's not in town. And he did pass away earlier this month, not this month, I'm sorry, January. And he had a massive stroke and died from complications of that massive stroke at home because Doug was blessed with 5 children, 4 daughters, all of which were RNs.
Wow.
And when it came time to come home, he arrived home to a hospital suite like you wouldn't believe. I mean, they went through, they come from Beth Israel in Boston and Mass General and so forth. So these ladies just took command of the situation for Doug. So he was comfortable. Al Toll and I visited with him on a Saturday, and he was gone on Sunday. So we had the pleasure of having the last few conversations with Doug. So as I said, he was a tugboat captain, hauling barges from the Gulf Coast all the way to the Canadian border. He said that many times he didn't know what he was hauling, but he said he was getting paid well to do so. So that was the thing. So, you know, he is the kind of guy that would step up, just like he conned me into helping with the spaghetti dinner when I didn't even know what it was all about. He did the same thing on our street, which was Amy Brown Road, which is a private road. And Doug was the guy who always ordered up the stone dust to fill the potholes. And you've got to believe I filled a few potholes with him as well, so we managed to get along. He was always willing to raise his hand to do things above and beyond the call of duty. a Marine, I'm proud of it, and he was glad to serve no matter what it was, whether it was his church, whether it was the town, whether it was this club. He was a great guy. And one of the things that I would like to point out, and I think I can do that, is that Doug always had an answer for you when he saw you. And the answer in many cases, I'm sorry, I wasn't quite prepared here, is he always would say, "You're having a good day." And you'd say, "Okay." And he said, "Well, here, take a mint. Take a mint." And that'll put a smile on your face. And so he always carried with a pocket of these little mints. So when you see those leaving a restaurant sometimes, think of Doug Moore, a great guy. And I wish I had a better story to tell you.
That's a great story. Yeah, thank you, Brad. Thank you very much. I'd like to now observe a moment of silence for our good friend, Doug Moore. Thank you. I'd also like to make a note of the fact that Dow Davis, a long-serving member of our club, he was active on the board here. He did programs, trips. He worked with the senior center. He has left us. He's resigned as of last month. He is going to be moving, I think, to Connecticut, so he's leaving Cape Cod. But he will be missed. Great, great guy. And also, I would say another mention would be that we have Frank Laundry is in the hospital. What hospital is he in?
Falmouth.
He's in Falmouth Hospital, and he's really having a rough time. But so we'll be thinking of him, keeping him in our best.
He's 99.
He's 99 years old. Now we have also a number of prospective new members in our group this morning. And just could you just stand up and give us your name, please? We'll start right here. Yes, you're first.
Marshall Cohen.
And we met Marshall at the open house that the senior center had here recently. It was really nice. I invited him to come in. Bruce Taggart. He's a friend and neighbor. We walk together. He and Marty are here today, which is terrific. Could we keep going, please? Do we have others that are here? Yes.
Yeah, Leo McCormick.
Leo, welcome. Welcome.
Jim.
We've got
A neighbor.
Rick Wittenmeyer.
Wick Whitmire is here as well too. We met again at the. We had an open house, very successful because we have several people here as a result of that very special gathering. So we welcome you. You welcome you all. Yes.
Yeah, Phil Weber.
Okay, Bill. Thank you. Thank you very much. So at this moment in time, I would like to move on to our treasurer's report, please. Our treasurer has a good sense of, I think, of being in Florida now. So Berkeley, do you have anything you'd like to offer?
Yeah, he sent me a report for December and January.
Use the mic.
Sorry. Yeah.
You want to ride home, Kelly? Nothing unusual has happened in the last 2 months, and the balance is now in our checking account, $1,329.19.
Okay, Berkeley, keep going as secretary's report
yeah.
now, please.
So we approve the
Can everybody
treasurer-
hear in back? Does everybody hear? No? We still got to know, so please speak up.
Closer.
Hold the mic closer to you.
The noise is coming out of that thing. We have approval of the treasurer's report, please.
So moved.
We have a motion, second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Wonderful, approved.
Okay, the secretary's report. The minutes of the last meeting were January something or other. They went out with the newsletter for January, and are there any amendments, corrections with additions? Yes.
I move they be accepted as presented.
I like that motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great.
Thank you. I
Great.
got a couple of other things. First of all, our next trip, where'd the board go? Next trip is the end of this month, the 28th. We're reinstituting the annual trip to the high school, We arrive at 10:30. They'll feed us lunch. The kids in the young adults in the culinary department prepare lunch, and if we're really lucky, the jazz band will play for us while we eat. But we'll see a lot of classes, including that special one where the computer drives the production of all kinds of objects and things, which is really quite fascinating. So we'll pass around a board for sign up. We'll meet at the school that morning in the corridor outside the hall. And if you sign up, you please have to show up. We've had an embarrassment some years in the past when we had, 20 people signed up and about 12 showed up. So they prepare for 20, and it's embarrassing for both sides.
Wives and other significant people are invited as well, too. Wives?
Yes,
Wives.
well, I'm getting to that.
I'm sorry.
That's
I'm
all right.
sorry. I'm okay, that's why Marcia said, well, she wanted to remind you.
The kids won't ask me a question because they say I take too long to answer. What's the other thing? Oh, there'll be a note in the newsletter that goes out the end of this week for those who were unfortunate enough to miss this meeting. There'd still be time they could sign up. So let's circulate the board, and we'll do that.
And on here it says number of wives included. I only put down one.
No. You would put down 2. Maybe that's not clear.
So just we go on number that says, dear Berkeley Johnson, I did the same thing you did.
Yeah, my wife's not going. But
she's not?
if
Oh.
your wife is going,
Just put 2.
put 2.
Okay, thank you. I need to have some instruction here, yes.
Well, it is misleading, I see.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
Yes, a couple of other things. I've been trying to work with the high school about a bunch of stuff. And I hope we're in good luck. Through the art teacher, a young art student has undertaken to create for us a new brochure. We've given her a mock-up I made and one that Bill Winters made, and she can pick the language from that and so on, but we'd like to see what an artist might create for us, and I think it'll be a good exercise, certainly fun for her. So that's coming along, and we'll hope to have some kind of a proof or whatever, because they will print it for us through another department. They've done the last 2, and that's on the way. The last item on my list is the open house that was held here at the Senior Center on the 31st of January. And we had a table, and Bruce and Bill and I spent part of the time here. And by George, all those people who stood up, I believe, signed up because we had a table at the open house. And so that's good news. And that's my report.
Thank you. Thank you. Bill Winters is going to talk to us about programs and trips, and Bill's been very, very busy. Sorry? Russ,
I'd like to mention one thing.
go ahead.
Every year, we have a one-time fundraiser for the Boys and Girls Club. And you think I need that?
Yes.
Bill?
Okay, every year we have a one-time fundraiser for the Boys and Girls Club. We have given upwards of $13,000 to $15,000 a year to them through our efforts. And what it means is we stand out in front of Stop and Shop and Roach Brothers on a Saturday, on weekends between the beginning of May and the end of June. We collect a lot of money. And every year it's been cash. This year we're using PayPal, so we hope to gather a lot more money from people who don't carry cash. And that's usually young people. At any rate, think about this. The next meeting we're going to be having sign-up sheets for people to volunteer for the Saturdays. It's a 2-hour shift from, a 3-hour shift from 10 to 1 and from 1 to 4. 2 different shifts. And I just wanted to remind everybody that think about this, and we'll have sign-up sheets next meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Russ. Bill, you're on.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make a note here that if you're a new person here in the room, that you do not have to be a resident of Mashpee to join the Mashpee Men's Club. So I live in Falmouth, so anybody that is new here, if you're thinking about joining, you can join even if you're not a Mashpee resident. So everybody who is a Mashpee Men's Club member should have gotten a couple emails from me in the last couple days. The first one was on our field trips. Did anybody not get the email? Okay, so that's a good sign. Things get into my spam folder and I don't even know that they're there sometimes. So I have already gotten some responses to that inquiry. Thank you so much for doing that. And the other email went out about midnight of last night dealing with our cluster photo site. So that should be coming. You'll get an invitation to be a member on that site, and that means you can put any pictures you want onto the site, and you can download pictures also. And last night I printed 3 photos from the cluster site just to show the quality of the pictures that we can get off of that site. So I'll pass that around. And I want to mention that exactly 1 month from today, on March 7th, we're going to be honored with Patrick McGinty, who is in the room, and he's going to give us a lively discussion about his wilderness adventures and his encounters with bears when he's been out walking around the woods, and that's going to be an exciting talk. Make sure that you don't miss that. On July 11th, we're going to be looking for volunteers for our annual barbecue. So think about doing that. And with that, we are thrilled to have with us today Joe Yukna from the Cape Cod Military Museum. Joe's interest in the military history of the Cape started when he worked as a Department of Defense police officer at Camp Edwards Otis Air National Guard Base in the late 1980s. Driving around the base and seeing all the abandoned buildings everywhere, it piqued his interest as to what went on here. Certainly something big had happened at that camp. He put out a call to create a military museum on Cape Cod, and his friend, Jerry Ellis, answered that call. Together they secured 2 barracks and 6 surrounding acres on Camp Edwards, which was then an open base, if you remember. You could just drive right onto it anytime you wanted. The events of September 11th ended that phase of the military museum. After a hiatus, they have been working on getting a venue to tell the Cape's amazing military story. They've been collecting artifacts and information on military activities here on the Cape, as well as the overseas achievements of units that trained here. They have provided various historical societies with military displays, there's one on the table over here, and offer a series of photo lectures to educate the public and promote the museum. After leaving the DoD police force, Joe started his own dog training business and is better known as Joe the Dog Man. So if you have a dog that needs some training, Joe's the man for you. He is the son of a World War II Korean War Navy veteran and the father of an Army War on Terror veteran. And you can learn more about the Cape Cod Military Museum by referring to its website, capecodmilitarymuseum.org, where you can also support their activities. The title of Joe's talk is Cape Cod, the Cradle of Invasion. And it covers how Cape Cod became the original home of the Engineer Amphibious Command and the Amphibious Training Command. We will learn about the units that trained here and their exploits overseas. Some of the units were the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Engineer Special Brigades in the 1st, 36th, and 45th Infantry Divisions. Please help me welcome Joe Yukna in the presentation, Cape Cod, the Cradle of Invasion.
Okay, I'm going to take a picture of your lovely faces, and then I'm going to silence my phone, and I suggest that you join me in this act. Unless you're a doctor, hopefully you won't need. Great. All right, I'm going to hand out a sign-up sheet for our.
Here's what I found.
A sign-up sheet for our newsletter. We don't sell you anything yet. It's interesting. We go into some military history and the new finds and things we have, and it gives you a menu of when I'm doing these lectures. Again, in fact, we're going to do Cradle of Invasion at the JFK Museum at 11 on Thursday the 16th, I think it is. So if you like this one, you have somebody you want to share it with, you can hear it again on the 16th. And also passing out business cards. Take a card or two, because you never know when you'll run into somebody, you know, oh, I got my dad's uniform, I don't know what to do with it, and stuff like that. We do accept things. If they have nothing to do with the Cape, we may move them on with another museum or use the funds to augment things that tell more of the Cape story. But we pretty much take everything because we're pack rats. All right, so if you could pass that out. Take those two. All right. Cape Cod, the Cradle of Invasion. Can everybody see the screen? Anything blocking of you?
Would it be a little higher?
I didn't. No, I didn't set that one up.
I don't know.
My cam. Are you going to go out? Oh,
I'll let you get that.
my camera died. Can you take a picture? Yeah. Not a good crowd here.
I can move back here. See what I can see here. Right on this one.
Push it in.
Pull up. Pull up. Could we put it on 3 chairs? Okay. I think that's it. Oh,
That's all right.
I can raise. I think so.
That's as good as we can get. All right. Ignore the man behind the screen. All right.
That's it.
Our story doesn't start in Cape Cod, but in Europe with a nobleman by the name of Louis. No, not a little further back, not Prince Louis, but close. Not King Louis, just too far back. Here we are. Lord Louis Mountbatten. Mountbatten was a military genius that came up with the combined armed forces concept. This military patch was also his idea. It exemplifies the concept. The eagle in the patch represents air power, the Tommy gun the Army, and the anchor the Navy. The combination of the 3 branches into one command made amphibious operations possible. He designed a similar patch for the U.S. forces and actually presented it to Franklin Delano Roosevelt for his approval. His unconventionally trained commandos were given the Axis forces fits with their hit-and-run raids years before America entered the war. When America entered World War II, the U.S. realized there would be a need for training troops in the most difficult operation of warfare and opposed landing on a hostile shore. In April of '42, Mountbatten, Sir John Dill, and U.S. generals decided that our troops should receive their initial amphibious training in the States before heading to the European Theater of Operations. America needed a site that could host a division, was near the shore, and had excellent rail lines for year-round amphibious training. Camp Edwards, on this map, it's the black area, met most of the requirements except for year-round training because it was a lot colder back then, and all the bays used to ice over. So Camp Edwards was the initial home. A camp was started in Carabella, Florida, and as Camp Edwards got underway. The Amphibious Command starting on Cape Cod is how we became the cradle of invasion. The Amphibious Training Center's job was to train regular infantry divisions in amphibious tactics. When General Trudeau and the officers of the training cadre arrived at Camp Edwards, their headquarters building was empty except for one folding table, one folding chair, and one staff sergeant. The Engineer Amphibian Command trained specialty troops in boat handling, transportation of troops to shore, clearing of beach obstacles, supplying the beach, creating beach exits, repair, medical evacuation. The EAC was commanded by Colonel, later General Daniel Noche. He and his staff worked 18 hours a day in June of '42. Cape Cod, however, was no stranger to amphibious operations. In 1941, prior to the U.S. entry into World War II, the 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red 1, trained at Fort Devens, Massachusetts. Troops were sent by truck down to Boston, where they boarded the USS Kent. The Kent sailed through the Cape Cod Canal. Here she is going through the canal. You notice she's white and has an American flag on her. We were not at war, but the U-boats were at war with the British ships. So she didn't want to be torpedoed on accident. And the reason they could take a picture of her was we were not at war. And we did, the restrictions had been put in place. There aren't many photographs of boats and things in the canal during World War II because no cameras were allowed and it was heavily guarded. They would sail through the Cape Cod Bay, through the canal, anchored in Buzzards Bay. Landing craft were lowered to the sea. Troops crawled down scramble nets, which are basically cargo nets. They would then leave the Kent and head to shore. Here they are landing on Cape Cod. Does anyone recognize that beach? It's Old Silver. If you look, you can see the boulders on the shore far away, and that hill, that house on the hill is still there.
Huh. Wow.
So Old Silver was a hopping place in '41. The date of this picture, June 6th, 1941.
Wow.
This very same unit, the 16th Infantry Regiment of the 1st Infantry Division, 3 years to the day landed at Bloody Omaha. The logical question for the EAC was where to find the men to drive the boats. Well, it's certainly possible to train landlubbers in seamanship. It would be easier to train men that had some experience at sea to become soldiers. The Army, Navy, Merchant Marines, and Coast Guard would search for men with small boat experience. Direct commissions were offered to yacht club members who could navigate. Many amphibious units were detoured to boat building centers. If you notice in this picture, you can see there's a mismatch in uniforms from different branches. In fact, there's a Coast Guard man on the back wearing his Donald Duck hat with his uniform. The Donald Duck hat was taken out of service in the 50s because when they wore an all-Navy uniform with the Class A's for them and a black hat, they were hit by cars because they were drunk heading back to the ship. So they gave them the white Dixie cap so they didn't show up and be seen. Well, they sent him to, you have to go very far to find construction of landing craft sites, because they wanted to get some experience to see how the engines were built and all that. So men who were drafted into the amphibious corps were sent to various factories. This factory is in Boston. This is the Boston Naval Shipyard. They're building LCMs, landing craft mechanized. They'd be shipped by rail down to Camp Edwards. Our great ally, Britain, provided experts to help train our boys in amphibious and commando tactics. And there was a Marine there as well. We had a couple Marines and a couple guys from the 9th Infantry Regiment, because they had done some amphibious training off the coast of Oregon. The Navy demanded the word amphibious be dropped, so engineer amphibian brigades became engineer special brigades. Each ESB, engineer special brigade, was to have 7,000 men and officers and 550 boats. Camp Edwards was not large enough to host an infantry division and the amphibious engineers. Other training and living areas had to be obtained. The main center for training was Washburn Island, Falmouth, and the land adjacent to it. This is a photograph of Quoit Bay. You can see landing craft going through the channel. You can see channels that have been dredged out in the bay. And upper left, you can see little lines going into the water. Those are the piers they used. And the large boat in the bottom of the photograph is a landing craft tank. It's a 95-foot boat. Washburn hosted the HQ and 4 boat piers. 1 and 2 were fueling piers, both over 700 feet long. Piers 3 and 4 were mooring piers, were both over 800 feet long. Washburn was reached originally by a pontoon bridge. Well, this, you can see the brown lines in this photograph of the piers. Was originally reached by a pontoon bridge that was replaced, actually added to a solid bridge. You can see all the tents in the background. The forest was cleared and tents erected. The first ESB started their water training with a combination of obsolete Navy boats and civilian boats. You can see some of those are Navy, some are just cabin cruisers. It wasn't long before Washburn was a bustling tent city. $18,000 men were housed in tents all over the southern Cape. Ever notice how straight and regular the roads on seacoast shores are? That's because they were made by Army bulldozers to house tents. Classrooms were hacked out of the forest. The second training area constructed was Camp Canduit at Point Isabella Katuitt. Camp Canduit had 4 piers ranging from 600 to almost 1,000 feet. Here are some Cape Cod commandos marching through the mess halls. This is a colored photo of a duck in Katuitt Bay. Other areas taken over by the Amphibious Engineer Command was the Crosby Boatyard in Osterville. This is called Camp Had Done It, a play on words on Camp Can Do It. The owners had a choice of leasing the boatyard to the military or having some control over what went on, or having it seized. They chose the lease. This is where heavy boat repair and heavy maintenance was taught. That water tower's not there anymore. There were floating dry docks large enough to host 2 LCMs. This is an early LCM which was 50 feet long, all metal construction. Scranton Avenue, Falmouth, and Falmouth Harbor also commandeered by the EAC, and they built these big boatyards. Those are still there today. You ever taken the Island Queen to Martha's Vineyard, you go right by them. Those big doors were blown in the hurricane of '44. But there they are today. I'm hearing a lot of ums. You know why? Because people don't know this stuff, and that's why we got to get our museum going. Because it's absolutely amazing the amount of stuff that happened here. At the golf on Pompanesset, it would have been a little louder. It was a anti-aircraft, anti-ship machine gun range. Planes pulling target sleeves and drones were used for anti-aircraft practice. Boats pulling target sleeves were used for anti-ship training. This training proved invaluable in the Pacific Theater of Operations. On December 31st, 1943, amphibious gunners manning 50 caliber machine guns on 2 LCMs knocked down 5 of the attacking Japanese aircraft. The first ESB was pulled for overseas duty in August 1942. They basically cleared the land and set up areas, only a little time for amphibious training. Luckily, they had more training in Ireland and Scotland, and here's where Mountbatten stabbed the first ESB in the back. As a Navy man, he became worried that the U.S. Army would take over amphibious operations because they were doing such a good job with it. He mentioned this to Admiral King. Admiral King relocates the 1st Engineer Special Brigade to shore duties only. The 1st was used for all shore duties, including the unloading of ships. The 395th Boat Battalion did get to pilot 60 British landing craft, LCAs, landing craft attack, during the invasion of North Africa that were crewless. The shore duties were so important that the 1st Engineer Special Brigade was eventually expanded to 30,000 men. The 1st ESB also landed in Sicily, Italy, southern France, and Utah Beach in Normandy. They landed on D-Day half hour before the regular infantry, and they were to clear beach obstacles and mark beaches. They had a 30% casualty rate, and this is the only war memorial that was built during the as the war was still going on by German prisoners. The 2nd ESB were the men Cape Codders referred to as the Cape Cod Commandos. Though the engineers were quick to point out, the commandos hit and run. They say we hit, but we don't run. The 2nd Engineer Brigade liked their nickname so much, they kept it. They would still be heard calling out to each other, "Buck up, you Cape Cod Commando," while landing on some Pacific island clear on the other side of the world. When this patch was manufactured for the new unit, 342 women and girls from Falmouth boarded trucks and jeeps to go over the bridge to Washburn Island and hand-sewed on patches. They spent 2,309 hours sewing on 20,000 patches. The 2nd ASB actually cleared the land for Camp Canduit. Here are some commandos on the march in Falmouth. We put the question out in the Falmouth Enterprise, and someone was able to identify the house because it is a rather unique design. And there it is today. It's still there. The woman who lived there as a girl used to run out and give water to the troops that were marching by. The commandos had to learn navigation, boat handling in all weather conditions. Here's a photo of an LCM that is broached or turned sideways to the surf. This is a boatman's nightmare. Much of the training occurred at night. Most invasions start at dawn to give the attackers the light of a full day to accomplish their mission. To facilitate this, invasion flotillas form up in the dark. Training is dangerous. There are many fatalities. The men who died in this one were using a U.S. Coast Guard wooden 38-foot picket boat as our command vessel to lead the landing craft. This is the type of craft that's swamped in the shoals. Here's what it looks like in the water. The boat had watertight compartments so it wouldn't sink, but it did not have a weighted keel, so it's not self-righting. If you remember the rescue of the Pendleton, the Finest Hours movie, that boat, even if it was capsized by a wave, would have spun around and ended up right side up. These didn't. The boat was towed into Martha's Vineyard, and one of the crewmen's body was found in the engine compartment. We had gone to try to restart the engine because they had lost power. That's why they had swamped. The amphibians trained with many different boats. The very first boat was an LCP, Landing Craft Personnel. This 36-foot wooden boat was the first of the famous Higgins boats. It could land on a beach and back away without damaging its propeller because of its unique hull design. Mr. Higgins was selling boats of this hull design prior to the war in the 1920s. Who was he selling them to?
Bootleggers.
Bootleggers, rum runners. You could slide in, drop your whiskey, and back out. Here they are landing on Cape Cod. One of the problems, there's no ramp. You can see the men have to jump over the sides. Next boat was the LCPR, which is a landing craft personnel ramp. They put a small ramp in the front of it. You can still, 2 men can go exit at a time, but you can see it's still quite crowded up there. The last one is the LCVP, Landing Craft Vehicle Personnel. This is the boat everyone's familiar with from Save It Private Ryan and D-Day. It could take a small vehicle or troops. They're dropping off a Jeep on Martha's Vineyard. This is an early version. As you can see, the coxswain's on a raised platform in the back. We actually are in communication with the last living officer from D-Day, and he was a cadet in 1942 and did 2 weeks in the summer at Washburn. And he said that boat was designed so stupidly because the first thing you do is pick the coxswain off. So the later ones, the coxswain's in low down in the ship so he wouldn't get shot. But it's an interesting observation. Here's this cadet going, this is the bad design. Here is an early LCM. This is a 50-foot. This is all metal. The other boats were all wood, and the reason they were wood was not rationed. We had plenty of trees. Metal was, of course, at a premium. And this is an early one, which is a 50-foot LCM. And somehow the engineer amphibians decided that this ungainly, slow craft would be faster and could carry more stuff and handle better if it was 56 feet long. Somebody had to tell me why that's so, but it was. It was faster and more maneuverable at 6 feet. And they figured out a way to add the 6 feet in the construction process so not interfere with the construction of the boat, no refitting. And an LCM could carry 1 Sherman tank, 30-ton tank, plus obviously more men. And again, this is an early one because the coxswain's not in an armored box. The last boat in the table of organization was the landing craft tank. This could carry up to 5 Sherman tanks. This was 95-foot all-metal construction, and the Navy wouldn't give up control of this, but it was in their table of operations, so they used it. All military training was military secret. Passes were required to drive on post or be near the water in Katuitt. Civilians were not to go near Washburn Island. You couldn't take pictures or talk about the duck. No civilian boats were allowed out at night because of all the training. Amphibious vehicles were also evaluated and tested here. One of the greatest innovations of World War II as the amphibious forces was the use of the amphibious truck, better known as a duck because of its technical initials, DUKW. The D stands for the year 1942. U stands for the body type, utility, K stands for all-wheel drive, and W stands for dual rear axles. The duck underwent its scientific evaluation here on Cape Cod. Here's one off the coast in Provincetown. We know it's an experimental one because you see the white little markings on the side of the hull? That's so they can take pictures of it and see how it's riding in the water. Here they're testing it on some dunes in Provincetown. How would you like to be the guy driving that off the cliff? And we know it's an early one because of the markings, and it doesn't have one of the many innovations that they did. You see the piece of metal in the front of the duck there? It's called the bow plane. The early ducks, if they hit a wave, or they... Now that's mine. And I thought I silenced her. If they hit a wave, they would submarine, or if they came down a steep embankment, they'd actually go in the water. And this prevented them, make them ride up the wave or ride up the water. The duck was initially rejected by the armed forces. When a United States Coastal Patrol craft ran aground on a sandbar near Provincetown, Massachusetts, an experimental duck happened to be in the area for a demonstration. With winds up to 60 knots, rain, and heavy surf, it prevented conventional craft from rescuing the stranded Coast Guardsmen because there were sandbars in between the boat. But the duck had no trouble. It went through the water, over the sandbar, over the water, and rescued the crew. And the military opposition melted. The duck they're leaving South Cape Beach, Mashpee.
There we go. Wow.
I want to take another picture there and now, pictures of this. I gotta go. But it was taken from an LCT, because see how high they are up? But I think if I get up on one of the lifeguard chairs, I can take the picture to match it. The duck saved the time-consuming task of loading a landing barge, unloading a landing barge on the shore, loading a truck, then driving the truck inland to where the supplies are needed. The duck was loaded at sea and drives over the shore to be unloaded where the supplies are wanted. General Eisenhower said the duck was one of the 5 greatest weapons of the Allies in World War II. 32 ducks a day were arriving by rail to Camp Edwards in 1942.
Wow.
Like I said before, no ducks could be mentioned, civilians not to even mention its existence, because it hadn't been used in combat yet. They wanted to surprise them, which they did in Sicily. The landing vehicle track, LVT, called an alligator or water buffalo, was evaluated here. These amphibious tractors were essential to the successful landings in the Pacific, as they could crawl over the coral reefs, then swim through the lagoon to shore. They were used by the Cape Cod commandos in the Pacific. However, the people from Osterville were upset because the amount of mud they churned up, silted over the oyster beds. No terrain was able to impede the nimble weasel, also evaluated here. There were a couple deployed at Omaha, but they were overloaded for the conditions and sank. But some of the ones on Utah Beach were used. Not every experimental vehicle is a success. Anybody ever hear of the aqua cheater? No? Well, the aqua cheater is terrible, had very little freeboard, and its general unseaworthiness was proven on Cape Cod at the cost of a couple of drowned engineers. One of the biggest advancements in amphibious tactics was actually very, very small. The engineer amphibians wanted to impress some visiting brass by having an LCP make a surprise landing in rough seas. This would prove the seaworthiness of the craft and its capabilities. Well, the LCVP made it, but the soldiers in it were so seasick, they were rendered combat ineffective and just laid down on the ground when they got off of it. If you've ever been seasick really bad, you might wish somebody shot you. So
A
they,
100% casualty rate, yeah, wow, wow.
they developed at Camp Edwards the seasick pill. So you've all probably taken one if you're going to cruise. And this was the seasick machine tester. And that was developed by doctors right here in Camp Edwards. The EA, the engineer amphibians, went through extremely tough training. They were in unbelievable shape. Here they are treading water with 60 pounds of equipment, boots, packs. I mean, treading water, nothing on it's hard. And these guys had jumped off that landing LCM, swum to shore with their packs and rifles. That's the reason their clothes are so dark, is they're soaking wet. They were trained in demolition, hand-to-hand fighting, picture on Washburn, bayonet training. They had this course set up that you'd go through kind of like a haunted house where you'd run into different scenarios. Like there were some Germans talking in, you come around a corner and there's some Germans doing this, and you had to decide whether you shot your blank or bayoneted them and stuff like that. But the dummy they had was full of had a bladder of pig's blood in it. So when you stuck your bayonet into the dummy, you'd get blood on you. And this picture also was taken in Camp Edwards. They had 3 48-foot cargo net training towers, because you had to go down the side of a ship like you saw earlier to get into your landing craft. And 48 doesn't sound very high until you're at the top of 48 feet. They had a 100-yard obstacle mud crawl obstacle course. Charges were set to go off slewing mud and water in the air. The course featured live machine gun fire, fired 30 inches off the ground. You see that wire? That's where the machine gun bullets would be firing. There were 6 30 caliber machine guns on this course. And the material that went with this about this course bragged that no one had been killed, which means more than one person had been shot on this course. And an interesting thing, they made the nurses that went through training on Camp Edwards crawl through this course with live machine gun fire. Why? I don't know.
I thank them.
Male nurses.
No, female. Yeah, they had orderlies that assisted them. There were 5,000 nurses trained in Camp Edwards. It was one of the largest hospitals, rehab hospitals in America. The big problem, the biggest enemy on the Cape that they encountered was everybody's poison ivy. And a lot of guys from parts of the country where there wasn't any poison ivy, and they'd crawl through this, and then they would have a miserable time recovering. While they were recovering, they could amuse themselves with their band. This is the Amphibious Corps Band. They did plays. The Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney movies. Let's put on a show.
Yeah.
That was a real thing. There wasn't TV. There wasn't the internet. There wasn't, it was radio spot, and everybody had it. So they actually did a lot of plays and stuff at the Katuitt USO. the guys themselves would write and put on skits and all that. One of them was so good they had to keep doing it every time a general visited it, they're redoing their skit.
Joe,
Yes,
do you know where the Kituitt USO was?
I do not.
Maybe I can find out for you.
That would be great. And of course, there was gambling, craps, poker. The officers' quarters at Camp Can Do It had slot machines.
Wow, no.
So when we get our casino in Mashpee, it won't be the first time. All right. The amphibious training command welcomed the 45th Infantry Division to the Cape. The 45th was a National Guard unit from Oklahoma, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. The four sides of this diamond represent the 4 states, and this was their shoulder patch.
Oh.
Because the swastika was actually an Indian sign for good luck. But they changed it
I didn't know.
to the Thunderbird.
Shot otherwise, yeah.
There was a shortage of boats, so many of the training was conducted with mock wooden boats set on dry land. The division was split between Fort Devens and Camp Edwards. The entire 45th Division would rotate through the Cape for their amphibious training. There were a lot of Indians in the 45th Division. Cape Codders were fascinated by these warriors from the West, and the Indians were very happy to be in New England. Why? They couldn't drink in their home states. The Indians put on a native dancing display that was witnessed by Fort Devens Camp Edwards morning radio personality, Devi Edwards. Devens, Edwards, her radio hit both places. Okay. So she asked the dancers if they would come on her program and talk about the significance of the Native American dancing. And because there was no highway system, you'd have to drive back roads to get to the radio station. Her show started at 6 in the morning, so you probably would have to leave your barracks at 3. And everybody said no, except for one. And he was this large, taciturn Indian, had a scar on his face. So he shows up for the interview on the radio, and Devi goes, "Hello, soldier, what should we call you?" "Call me soldier." "Where are you from?" "From far away." And she tries another series of questions, all with one-syllable answers. She's very nervous. He's a very intimidating, scary-looking guy. So finally she goes, "Well, what's the significance of the native dance to your culture?" "Well, much like Shakespeare is the English language, the Native American dance was essential to interpreting our culture. He was the most educated guy in the unit," and was just playing with her. The most famous member of the 45th was armed with a pen, not a rifle. Anybody know who this is?
Bill Malden.
Bill Malden, yeah. And you notice the boots he's wearing. Can you show your boot? Because he must have swiped one of these boots or traded a cartoon with an amphibious engineer because they wore jump boots. Most of the 45th didn't. So he did his amphibious training with the 45th Division. And this cartoon demonstrates it. The caption goes, "Hey Joe, when you hit the water, swish your feet around. They could use it." Notice the hand placement. You would think like climbing down a ladder, you'd put your hands on the horizontal rungs of it.
Yes.
If you did that, the guy coming down above you would step on your hand. So your feet went on the horizontal rope and your hands went on the vertical rope. And that's why you know that he'd gone through amphibious training, because he has the hand placement correct. He liked to get most of his detail correct in his cartoons. This, of course, is his most famous. He did several variations of this one. He sold his comic strips to the Boston Herald while he was here. The training of the 45th and 2nd Engineer Special Brigade ended in an invasion of Martha's Vineyard. The boats would leave Cape Cod and land their infantry in the shores of Martha's Vineyard at sunrise. The invasion was even to have paratroopers capture the airport. Elements of the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment arrived a few days before the planned invasion. The paratroopers had to go through hellish training of their own to earn their jump wings. If you got your wings, you were able to then blouse your pants into your jump boots. And herein lies the problem. The Army engineer amphibians worked in water and wore high jump boots and considered themselves a specialty unit, wore jump boots and bloused their pants. So just before the invasion, a couple days before the invasion, a large group of paratroopers ran into a large group of engineers on Main Street, Buzzards Bay. The All-Americans decided that the Cape Cod Commandos did not have the right to wear jump boots and tried to remove them. The amphibians resisted and a huge brawl ensued. The Bourne Police and State Police just blocked off the road and called for MPs from the base. 6 MPs had to go to the infirmary. The first battle of the 82nd Airborne was over boots in Buzzards Bay. The invasion was so top secret, of course, Martha's Vineyards were out with signs welcome the invaders. The 75th Composite Infantry Training Battalion acted as enemy troops for the invasion. There were charges going off, smoke screens, gunfires, aircraft swooping and mock attacks. Several units did end up landing on the wrong beach. One did get lost, but in all, the invasion was ruled a success. The amphibians, however, had captured the airport by the time the 508th was to drop on it. Probably payback for the boot war. The 82nd Airborne jumped during the invasions of North Africa, Sicily, and Normandy. The 45th was then shipped overseas and soon used their training conducting landings on Sicily and southern France. The next division to arrive for previous training was the Texas 36th Division. Cape Codders and these tough hombres hit it off, even if the Texans complained about the lack of spices in the New England diet. The Texans liked to fight so much that the record, "The Eyes of Texas Are Upon You," had to be pulled from local jukeboxes. The Texans would play the song and then insist that everyone in uniform stand at attention. If the request was refused, the refuser was forced to stand or a fight would break up. So now is the singing part of Bill told you there's singing in this, right? No?
Yeah.
All right, the tune is "I've Been Working on the Railroad." You all know that one? So here we go. The eyes of Texas are upon you all the livelong day. The eyes of Texas are upon you. You cannot get away. Do not think you can escape them from night till early in the morn. The eyes of Texas are upon you till Gabriel blows his horn. That was terrific. Give yourselves a hand. That was just wonderful. On September 10th, the 2nd ESB and 3rd ESB conducted a parade. They marched on land, and then 1,000 boats paraded around Cape Cod Canal and went through the Cape and went through the Cape Cod Canal. This is actually a picture when the first ESB was training, because again, you couldn't take pictures when the war started. But to give you an idea, Jerry Ellis, our co-founder, was a boy at the time, and he snuck down to the canal. He said the roar from 1,000 landing craft going through the canal was deafening, and the diesel fumes were everywhere. The 36th Infantry Division training culminated in a 3-day second invasion of Martha's Vineyard by the 3rd ESB. The 36th Division had all units attached to it. They invaded Nantucket as well. This was the full division. All units, including tanks and the new M10 tank destroyer, were used. Boats left from Quoit Bay, Katuitt Bay, Dennis, and LSTs embarked from New Bedford. A large group of generals and admirals was standing on the cold pre-dawn darkness to observe the training exercise. Near the appointed time, a lone boat looking lost pulls up, and the coxswain yells out, "Is this Red Beach?" The admirals and generals smirk to each other, thinking, "Oh, here's another training screw-up." Suddenly out of the gloom comes a wave of landing craft in perfect formation. One of the many modifications the engineers did was they put the exhaust for the boats underwater so that the boats are much quieter and the wind was blowing the noise away from the generals. The lost boat was actually from the opposition forces sent to set off charges for realism. Here's a color photograph of the landing. You can see there's LCRs, LCVPs in the landing. Here they're putting down matting so that vehicles could drive across the sand to get inland where the ground's harder. The exercise was so good, it was called off a day early. Here's some, there's a land, this isn't that invasion, but this was on Cape Cod, we're not sure where. I think it might be Sandy Neck. But interesting thing, if you see there's low altitude barrage balloons. We can't prove it, but we're working on it. They don't mention who was manning the balloons in any of the books I've read on the Amphibious Training Command and the Engineer Amphibious Command when they were here. But when they got to Florida, there was a colored unit, I think the 302nd, doing the barrage balloons, and they were the only colored unit to land on D-Day. They were famous at the time for it, and one of the medics of the 302nd won a Distinguished Service Cross for his the work he did on D-Day. But we can't prove it's the same unit, but more than likely it was. We just came across a photograph of Joe Louis doing a boxing exhibition on Washburn Island, and his role during World War II was to do these exhibitions to raise morale of African American troops. So, ipso facto, the more likely was African Americans on Washburn Island. We know there was a colored quartermaster unit out there, but trying to find out if the barrage balloon guys were there or not, we haven't been able to figure that out. Before they left, unfortunately, they lost several officers to the fire at the Coconut Grove in Boston. 500 people were killed in that disaster. Yeah, the owner had locked some of the doors because people were chewing and screwing. They'd eat their meal and drink and then take off, so they locked some of the exits so they couldn't get out. And they had a rotating door in the front that also jammed up with people. The 36th then went off to invade Salerno, Anzio, and southern France. The amphibians in most of their boats went by rail to Florida in Camp Johnson, Gordon Johnson. Here they are, getting on the train. But there were some that sailed, especially the LCMs, because they're hard to get on a rail. And they made the 2,170-mile trip to Carabello, Florida, because it's near Tampa. You have to go all around Florida, too, to get up there. And you can see they didn't have heads or toilets on the boats because they weren't designed to be out that long. So they built an outhouse. If you can see the picture sort of falling off, they built an outhouse on the back of their boat for the men to use. And this actually was the mess hall boat. They ate their meals together on this boat.
Did they use the intercoastal waterway?
Yes. Yeah. The Cape Cod Commandos trained with range battalions. The 2nd ESB had been split by this time to form the 3rd ESB. Replacements brought the units up to full strength. The amphibians would motor the ranges out to Martha's Vineyard, and the ranges would scale the cliffs at Gay Head. And before you know it, they were climbing the cliffs at Pointe du Hoc, Normandy. And the American flag laying on the ground is not a sign of disrespect. Their communication was faulty. They had, Rudder's Rangers had taken Pointe du Hoc, but nobody heard from them, so they assumed they were dead, because we only had 200 men, and their reinforcements actually went and landed in Omaha Beach rather than going to reinforce them. And Allied planes were preparing to strafe them, thinking they're Germans, when they put the flag on the ground to let the planes know that they were American. It took a while to relieve them. They ran out of ammunition. They had to use German weapons, capture German weapons, because they were out of ammo for their own weapons. In fact, a couple of the Rudder's Rangers were wounded when the American forces finally came up to relieve them, because there's a different sound between the American and German weapons. And so they heard the German weapons coming from that area, and they shot back before they realized their mistake. But the taking of Pointe du Hoc was absolutely an amazing feat of military arms. The Cape Commandos were wanted by MacArthur in the Pacific Theater of Operations. The problem was all the deck space on the ships heading to the Pacific were reserved for aircraft. Remember, this is 42. We weren't doing very well. We had lost the Philippines. We were cheek and jowl at Guadalcanal. We have Navy losses up there. And airplanes were vital to stopping the Japanese advance. So all deck space was, aircraft was stored. You can see the P-38s on this ship. And the problem was the 36-foot landing craft wouldn't fit through any ship's hull. So you couldn't put the boat inside. Well, General Heavey of the Amphibious Training Command, or actually Amphibious Engineering Command, came up with the idea that we could ship the boats in pieces in the hull of the ships and reassemble them in Australia. So the 411th Boat Battalion, the ones that were at Scranton Ave, that big boat sheds, they were sent down and worked for 2 weeks on the Higgins Boat Factory in New Orleans. Then they were shipped over to Queensland, Australia, built their own factory, and then assembled thousands of landing craft to be used in Pacific Theater operations. So when I say we were the cradle of invasion, I'm not kidding. By the time they hit the Philippines, it was the 75th combat landing for the 2nd Engineer Special Brigade. A Cape Cod Commando landed Douglas MacArthur. If you look at this photograph, Douglas is pissed, and all the other men in the party look extremely nervous because he wanted the boat to land him on dry earth, and the Cape Cod Commando said no, and dropped his ramp and made him wade through the surf like everybody else. But when Douglas saw how dramatic it looked wading to shore, every other landing on an island he did, he made them drop the ramp in the water so he could wade to shore. The Engineer Special Brigade won the Presidential Unit Citation. When the amphibs left in 43, because they came back up, the same thing, a lot of boats sailed up from Carabella to the Cape Cod. That was it for amphibious training on the Cape. The hurricane of '44 caused extensive damage to the Cape. Many trees were knocked down. Some of the 5,000 German POWs were almost Africa Corps. They were housed in Camp Edwards. And here they are boarding a bus in Boston for a trip probably to Camp Edwards. Set up 6 sawmills. They would go out, load up the trees on trucks, bring them back to Camp Edwards and turn them into lumber. They would get paid for their labor. If a tree was taken off your property, you'd be paid for the lumber of the tree. And they ended up doing 7 million board feet of lumber by the Africa Corps axemen. The same enemy employees were used to tear down Camp Can Do It in 1944, so it returned to its pre-war condition. They even planted trees to get it to look natural. Now, how many people heard about the bottle that was found in Kentuit with the notes in it from the German POWs? Well, this is their story. But there's an even funnier story. If you haven't read about Cape Cod Times, a couple of news stations had it on their things, but there was a message in a bottle, it's the name of the article. Eric Williams did one for the Cape Cod Times. I talked to him. I love his articles, actually. The 50th anniversary, so that's 92, they had their anniversary on Cape Cod, their reunion in Cape Cod. So they were a couple of, 4 or 5 veterans are walking around Point Isabella trying to find where their camp was, taking photographs and walking around. And out from one of the McMansions comes the owner, and she's yelling at them to stop taking pictures, demanded to know what realty company they worked for. And they said, no, lady, we were stationed here in World War II. And she gets furious and said, oh, you are the ones who buried all that trash in my yard. It wasn't them, it was the Nazis. They were off fighting the Japanese. So, and we have our own bottle. If you could pick up that beer bottle there, show everybody. Because who drinks wine anyways? Because they find a wine bottle from the Germans. That's a beer bottle that was dug up in Washburn Island next to a fire pit. It's got 1942 on it. They didn't non-returnable bottle, so we know that it was done by the Cape Cod Commandos, drank out of that beer bottle. So we have our own bottle story. But Kentuit Historical Society has the bottle now. They're trying to decipher the notes and see if they can find descendants of the German POWs that put the note in there.
What did the note say? I don't know.
It was mainly their names, Camp Edwards, 1944. There's a note that's scrolled tightly in the middle of it, of the bottle, and they can't get that one out yet. They're deciding whether they want to cut the bottom of the bottle out to get it out. They don't want to damage the note. That has more writing on it. So it was basically a list of names on a bunch of cardboard. And the Camp Edwards in 1944 is what all I know that's written, but there is some more writing that hasn't been deciphered yet. Washburn, or it's known by the amphibians, the island, had one more duty to perform. The 5,000 bed convalescent hospital on Camp Edwards used Washburn as the rest and relaxation stations for recovering soldiers. 800 war-damaged men were bussed over to Washburn Island in the morning, then swapped out with another 800 at noon. Because if you went to the beach and you're the only guy there with one arm, you're going to feel very self-conscious if you're the only guy there with one leg. But if there's 800 other guys that are missing something or burned or whatever, and you're all learning how to swim with missing a, you know what I mean? Play ping pong, whatever. It was really a good healing place, and one of the probably the only place where men were trained for war, and then helped recover in the same spot. Oh, does anybody know what that is.
Fire
Escape,
escape.
shoot. Yeah,
Right, because if you got a bunch of guys with no
Escape.
legs on the second floor, they can't escape, so they had an orderly up there would throw them down the chute to get people off the second floor quickly. And this is, we have a book, there's an album over in the corner on that table, which has all the construction photos of the 4 facilities built. And they, this came in because I did this same talk at the Requoit Estuary, and the family had it, saw the sign we had in front about the talk, and they brought it in. So I want to thank the Soprano family for bringing that in. All right, that concludes our talk. One last thing, we've been trying to get a place going. You heard the story about 9/11 and all that. We are now starting a capital campaign because we're in negotiations right now with taking over the basement of the JFK Museum in Hyannis to be our home of the Cape Cod Military Museum. But we need to, if anybody is good at raising funds or any ideas of raising capital, because we have to renovate it and get a building permit for it. But this is just one of the many stories that we need to tell. It's so interesting that the JFK Museum reached out to us because there are some interesting tie-ins with presidents. George Bush crashed an aircraft in Hyannis during his naval training. How many people knew that? No, yeah, it was an Avenger. He came in too close to the one in front of him on landing, and the turbulence from that plane caused him to dip a wing and slide up the runway. Nobody was hurt, but he totaled the plane. And it might have been Barbara 1, because he and Barbara met when she married the first man she ever kissed.
Wow.
So we have that tie-in. We had, the Anti-Aircraft Training Command was also based in Camp Edwards. And we had WASPs, the women Air Force pilots, and they were doing a top secret drone program where they were flying in an aircraft
You take care of it, yeah, good.
looking down, and they would fly the drone that the anti-aircraft men would shoot at with the remote control, which is top secret at the time. And this is the same technology that was going to be used in the plane that Joseph Kennedy got killed in over in England. So we have a tie-in there, you know. So it's, and we also want to set up, if you've been to the JFK Museum, it's really about their time in Hyannis, the one picture PT boat, 109. So one of the things we want to do is do a whole display on PT boats, not just 109, but their use in World War II. Because we did have a PT boat on Cape Cod at Woods Hole. They use it for, and we don't know what they use it for because it's still classified, torpedo work. And they fire off torpedoes on it because our torpedoes stunk in the beginning of the war. So, thank you. Any questions, any comments? Likes, dislikes? Yes, sir.
A little historical note that some of the ducks I know ended up in Boston.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the duck boat that's up in Boston, they were originally the World War II variants. They now have their own variant that they make with diesels, and I think they're like Boston whalers. They got styrofoam in them so they can't sink even if they get swamped because of that the tragedy they had in Missouri. And the only reason they're able to operate is they can self-insure. We had duck boat tours in Hyannis, but you had to have $1 million in the bank or else you couldn't operate because no insurance company after that disaster in Missouri would let you use the duck boats for that. But because they're big enough where they have $1 million in the bank and they're actually not using World War II vehicles anymore. They have their own purpose-built vehicles. But they did used to use the World War II variations. Yes, anything? All right. Thank you very much.
Do we know if any German prisoners escaped from Cape Cod?
My uncle.
Yeah, they did have escapes. Now, the funny thing was, they had an American
Thank you.
prison on Camp Edwards for American troops who went AWOL. And if one of those prisoners escaped, everybody locked their doors because it would come over the radio. But if one of the German prisoners of war escaped, they're like, no big deal. But one of the articles we have, because we have some copies of the Camp Edwards News, is one guard did catch a couple of escapees and he knocked one out with a right hook and stuff like that.
The reward would be you get to go to the Russian front probably if you escaped.
Well, again, probably early on they wanted, by the end of the war they didn't know.
No,
They did not want to go.
they were well off right where they were.
We had thousands of Italian POWs, and they were housed at Miles Standish in Plymouth. But it never was the same level of security. Italian families could go and take an Italian prisoner home on Sundays for Sunday dinner. And of course, by 43, Italy left the war anyway. But all prisoners of war had to be repatriated. So even if the
Didn't want to go.
prisoners of war didn't want to, they had to go back.
Wow.
In fact, an American interpreter working at Camp Edwards fell in love with a German interpreter working at Camp Edwards. She had to go to Austria to marry him to bring him back to the country.
Wow. Wow. Good. Joe, again, thank you very, very much. Great job. Great job. Do we have any other business that we'd like to bring up? No. If not, I'd like a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
We were gonna say,
Wait.
women are invited to the tour at the high school and the next
Yeah,
meeting.
we'd like to say women are invited to the tour of the high school on the 28th, and also for the the March meeting, you want to have wives here too. And I'd also like to include April, because we're having, and May as well, because we're having town people coming in and speaking. So it'd be great if we could have your wives and others, significant others, come and join us for all of our future meetings for the rest of the year. Okay, we're adjourned. We're going to have the raffle now.
The 50-50 raffle. Do we have our presenter? Do we have our presenter pick the winning ticket? Sure.
It's the one you tape to the bottom, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's it. Speak loudly.
All right. 247-199. 247.
We have a winner. We have a winner.
We have a winner. $12.
I missed it by
I think then we are all set. I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and I hope to see you again next month as well. Thank you.
But before we take off, I just want to mention one word about the patriotism of the men and women during World War II. And this talk meant a lot to me because my father was a corporal up at Camp Edwards training the 1st Amphibious Brigade. And then they sent him off to Officers Candidate School, and he came back and he landed at Normandy with the 1st Amphibious Brigade as a second lieutenant, when second lieutenants, as he said, were expendable. And if you take the liner out of the helmet and you look at the steel pot, you'll see rust rings in there from where they would wash their feet and also cook their supper. And so we owe so much to the men and women of that time period, and sometimes we forget that. Okay. Thank you all so much for coming.
Yeah, if you want to look at this, we have photographs and stuff over on the table over there too.